I'd like to call the September 7th regular meeting of the Tonganoxie City Council to order. Dan, will you please call the roll, please?
Ms. McCutcheon.
Here.
Ms. Stevens.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Hempel.
Here.
Mr. Donnelly.
Here.
Mr. Dale.
Here.
Mayor Freeze is absent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to have everybody stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to have a moment of silence for one of them would be Jeff Bunnell, who was our IT consultant that passed away, and also the 13 service members who recently died in serving in Afghanistan. Okay, carry on. The approval of the minutes. Have all council members had a chance to read the minutes? If they have and there's no questions, the chair entertains a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second. All those say aye.
Aye.
Want to vote aye? Opposed? Unanimous. Okay, has everybody had a chance to look at the consent agenda? If there's no comments, the chair entertains a motion.
I make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a second to approve the consent agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carried. Okay, next thing is the open agenda. Dan, do we have anybody speaking tonight?
Yes, we have two people that have requested a chance to address the council. One is Mary Gergic, who's here, and the other is Monica Gee. Monica Gee does have a video she wanted to show. I think it's 32 seconds long, so if you'd like, we could begin with that. We can get it pulled up
Okay,
here.
that'll be fine.
Thank you.
State your name and record for the, or
Monica
name and
Gee.
address for the record.
17685 214th Street, Tonganoxie, Kansas. As you might recall, I asked the city if they would like to join up with the Business Association in creating a 30-second video for the Tonganoxie Sports Live. Our goal was to feature downtown, our industrial park, Urban Hess, how we have our great amenities, which include fire, police, the library, and how we're building into townhomes and other things, not just family structures. So I think they did a really good job with that, and I just wanted to share it with you guys. It just came in today.
Community it is today. Tonganoxie's past. From its native roots to the bustling community it is today, Tonganoxie's past is as unique as its future. With small town charm and big city amenities, Tonganoxie is the ideal place to grow a business and grow a family. Just 20 minutes from both Lawrence and Kansas City, Tonganoxie is perfectly positioned. Take an afternoon and come explore Tonganoxie. To learn more, go to tonganoxie.org.
Again, I just hope it meets what our expectations were. I think it turned out to be a really good clip, even though it's 30 seconds and limited, but we do have the right to use it if we want for anything else.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Mary Gerken. State your name and address for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Good evening. My name's Mary Gergic. I live at 21610 Kansas Avenue, Tonganoxie, just south of the city limits in Leavenworth County. I'm very concerned about the amount of noise and vibration, commotion out at the Gergic's farmstead, south of town, we're just north of the industrial park and the Hills dog food plant project. Between the sewer line going in the hills to the north of us and to the west, then the Hills project to the south, and then the city putting in the 12-inch water line. I was surrounded by noise on all sides of me. And so even on a national holiday yesterday, there was a lot of commotion across the street with noise from the industrial construction noise. I don't know what can be done about that, but my house is vibrating. It sounds like thunder rolling out there. So I'm very concerned about how that is affecting the neighborhood and those citizens that live in Eagle Valley and the grade school, USD 464 elementary and middle school. The other thing I wanted to bring up to your attention, I recently read an article in the Leavenworth Times that came out of the Lawrence Journal-World newspaper and the Lawrence Journal-World newspaper, both. And I didn't bring a copy of it. I'd be glad to send it to any of the council members if I get your email address. But it had to deal with the drought conditions. And I know tonight you're going to be speaking about the water tank that's going to go in over there for the Hills project, using 3 million gallons of water a month. And these articles that I read from Governor Kelly, different water organizations, they talked about the drought conditions, especially in western Kansas, and they talked about shipping water from eastern Kansas out to western Kansas for the drought and the Ogalla Aquifer. But they also mentioned the drought conditions in northeast Kansas. And so my question to the city council is, you're going to provide to Hills this 3 million gallons of water a month. And my question is, where are you going to get your water source? Because one of these articles mentioned that even north of us, Iowa, Nebraska, the creeks, rivers that go into the Missouri River are already showing drought conditions. So what happens if the BPU or wherever your water source dries up, they can't provide water to Hills? Where is that water going to come from? Because the governor's talking about it and individuals in the state of Kansas, so there's my time. But I want that to be addressed.
Okay.
Is where's your water gonna come from?
Your
for the,
time is up.
Water tank. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, under old business, is there any old business? Okay,
No, Mayor Pro Tem.
okay, new business. Dan, do you want to introduce this? It's a public hearing. We're not going to open up the hearing just yet. We want to hear some comments from Dan on the 2022 budget revenue neutral rate.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I'm pulling up a brief presentation here that I hope will get us started in the conversation tonight and do a good recap of where we've been so far this year and preparing for our annual budget adoption consideration. So the agenda tonight, I'll start with a quick recap of where we've been, but focus primarily on the critical items that we're asking for consideration on tonight. The first is the completion of 2 separate public hearings. The first one being new. Senate Bill 13 required local units of government that exceed the revenue neutral rate or potentially exceed it to conduct a specific public hearing published specifically on the city website and in the newspaper, and we've completed both those required publications to hold that public hearing tonight. The second is a typical year public hearing that we hold each year in developing the next year's budget, and that public hearing is just going to be on the agenda as its own item, and we can hear the comments, feedback, input of anyone who chooses to attend and offer that to the city council prior to you considering the budget adoption. Once we've completed both those public hearings, there are 2 steps that would actually be required tonight. The first is a resolution, again, required as part of the revenue neutral rate determination, and that's prepared and included in the agenda packet. And finally, consider adoption of the budget as published and as presented initially tonight, or with some adjustments that would be still possible in this step of the process, and I'll detail that as we wrap up tonight. And if there's any further discussion or questions, happy to answer those at any time. Yes, any questions before we
Any council members have any questions of Dan about the neutral revenue? Okay. At this time, I'd like to open up the public hearing for the revenue neutral rate. At this time, if anybody out in the audience would like to speak for or against, now is the time to do so. If not, the public meeting's closed. Next on the agenda is the resolution itself, 2022 budget revenue neutral rate. And I'm going to ask council members if they have any comments or suggestions at this time. Being none, the chair entertains a motion to adopt the resolution.
Mayor Pro Tem, I might offer one quick clarification
Okay.
about the resolution. It's, like I said, included in the agenda packet. It does not specify the mill levy. It just specifies that we're contemplating a mill levy higher than the revenue neutral rate. Just wanted to point that out.
Okay.
It doesn't
Thank you.
finalize that.
So there's a motion to consider to adopt Resolution 92101, a resolution to exceed the revenue neutral rate in the 2022 budget,
Are you
which would basically be if the state hadn't made this new policy, we would just use the budget that we currently have. Correct.
Yeah, so essentially what the new
I
law
mean, that's the
does,
motion, that's the
Yeah.
motion I just made.
that's perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, it will require us to take a separate action on this, and then the next item will be to actually discuss the budget for next year.
Was that a motion?
Yes.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a second. Dan, will you call the roll, please?
Ms. McCutcheon,
Yes.
Ms. Stevens,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Hempel,
Yes.
Mr. Donnelly,
Yes.
Mr. Dale.
Yes.
All ayes. Thank you. Motion passes.
Okay, the next consideration is consideration of the proposed 2022 budget is published. Dan or George, do you want to make comments first before I open it up to the public hearing?
I think we can do a few more slides in the presentation before we open that public hearing, if that's all right.
Okay.
I'll do a quick recap of the items included in the proposed budget. That way, if anyone chooses to speak on the public hearing, they can specify on what topics they'd like to discuss. The schedule and the calendar, I wanted to illustrate in an overview sense how long of a process this has been, and thank the city council for their patience and discussion and efforts through this summer and actually going back to the spring of this year. We started back in March of 2021, developed CMIP expectations in May or early May of 21, and then completed, I think, a record number, at least in my tenure with the city, of budget work sessions this summer. And I think they were fruitful discussions, and some of that was due to the impact of Senate Bill 13 and examining how that changed our process, including how late we're considering approval of the budget, about a month later than we normally do. But again, just to point out where we are tonight, after completing the 2 required public hearings, now that we've approved a revenue neutral rate determination, we have from tonight until October 1st to approve the final budget and deliver that to the county clerk for filing. Public hearings, I won't go into detail because we're about to start the second of the 2 required this evening. But going into the proposed budget detail, these slides are the result of the discussions and the feedback from the city council through those 6 budget work sessions that I described earlier. I think this slide really illustrates in great summary level view 3 what I could consider categories of initiatives and efforts in the budget. The first being local infrastructure investment by the city from a variety of funding sources, some from sales tax proceeds, some from cash balances and funds that have built up over time, some from operational budgets in areas like utilities that have investments shown in that list. Some that are continuing on from this year that are major include the construction cost of the Church Street Bridge, a project that we're well underway on the design phase of, and hope to finish that up by January of next year. 5th year of increased street maintenance. That's a huge initiative for the community. I think people see that every day in the streets they live on or drive on in town. And I think the quality of the street condition and the amount of green that's replaced orange or red on the condition index map show the impact of that 4-year current dedicated schedule of improved street maintenance efforts. We also have an investment at the water park facility for elevated items rehab, so powder coating and repairing, addressing safety issues with the stairway. They can't get sticky pads to stand where people walk at the same place up the stairs, and so that kind of investment is going to help us avoid future liability and also just improve the aesthetic look of that wonderful facility that we take very good care of year after year. Church Street Stormwater Phase 2 is another big initiative to install the northernmost portion of those improvements. And then finally, another initiative that Councilmember Stevens brought forward was including funds to potentially purchase up to 2 bicycle repair stations that could be advertised to people using those types of modes of transit or recreation in our city park facilities. Operational support is also a key item, and the city council every year does a good job of considering what sort of requests the departments make for initiatives or equipment. And this year we do have a significant investment in the police department fleet with 3 Tahoes, and also an expectation that we greatly enhance service availability for codes by combining the full-time firefighter position currently addressing licensing and inspections with that code enforcement duty, which replaces a former part-time position that simply couldn't be available at peak demands to meet all the needs of the community for code work. 5% merit opportunity is built into this budget. That means up to 5% is available for the highest performing employees. And again, some smaller items included legal service support and fire department operational costs that came in as less significant costs, but are also important for training our people and ensuring that we have technology available to meet the request of the community for service. Community support and development's kind of the third category illustrated here, and I think when you combine economic development efforts like LCDC funding, the county regional transportation study funding participation, with our local events support, which include community event support and funding for the Tonganoxie Business Association, Arts Council, and Historical Society, you can see a dedicated effort made by the city to grow the community and help support especially community events and facilities here in town that benefit from those events taking place. Looking at financial underpinnings of the budget, this slide just illustrates, again, the focus of this and the way the budget's prepared and analyzed is first and foremost making sure that fund balance goals are maintained. Those are critical to consideration for items like long-term debt rating, as well as eventuality planning for, in the case of a disaster or another emergency, the city having enough funds on hand to maintain operations and services long-term. Structural alignment of revenue and expenditures, that's a really important one that we've worked over many years to better align revenues with the proper expenses. This year that includes a $500,000 moving from the general fund to the debt fund to fully cover our debt service bills, which is the first time we've been able to accomplish that entirely with the property tax revenues that are generally best suited for that use in the debt fund. And finally, conservative assumptions. We don't make radical changes in revenue expectations. We take a measured approach. And while sometimes that means you end the year with more reserves than you anticipated, it also means you're not too far out over your skis with pandemics or other unexpected events that could potentially make a big impact on the community. All right. Financial overview of the general fund revenue picture. You can see in the blue, dark blue, I guess, largest piece of the pie is about 45% of that budget in ad valorem or property tax and combined with motor vehicle tax. Second highest source of revenue is sales and use tax at 19%. That's grown over the last couple years. I think 3 years ago we were about 16 or 17%. So sales tax performance has been positive. Compensating use tax as well has been positive, and so you can see that growing as a share of the general fund budget. The other miscellaneous grant or other revenues include grants, franchise fees from other utilities that use our right-of-way and have agreements with the city, court fines and fees, and user charges for things like the water park, and permitting and licensing for development activity. On the expense side for the general fund, you can see there's overwhelmingly the fund supports public safety, with police and fire making up about 62% of that general fund dollar being spent, or all the dollars in the general fund being spent. Public Works and Administration make up the second tier of departments in terms of budget. And then you can see also Municipal Court and Water Park are fairly equitable comparative scope of budget authority. And that's followed up by codes, planning, animal control, and legislative, which means support for public meetings, city council expenses, things like that. This slide, I think, is a good indicator, too, of year-to-year changes. So when you look back at the prior two budget years, you can see for each department the trend in overall general fund expenditures. This doesn't break out ongoing costs like salary and benefits compared to one-time costs like equipment that's purchased out of the general fund. So you can see probably the most striking thing about the slide is police and fire both showing an increase over the prior 2 years. That's pretty significant. In the case of police, that's because of 3 vehicles being purchased, when in the last 2 years, no vehicles were purchased for those departments. For fire, it's obviously the addition of the conversion of a part-time codes person to a full-time combined fire department position. Any questions about this slide before we show a few more? Breaking out general fund expenditures, you can see that over 70% of the general fund cost for again, the entirety of general fund expenses at a little over $2.5 million are personal services. That includes salaries, benefits, and other support for payroll costs of employees that provide the services that the general fund covers. Contractual services are the next highest, and that's commonly the case. We contract out certain departments like city planning, city engineering for the most part, and a large scale of our IT or software services as well. Switching gears from the general fund, looking at the utility funds, again, for us, that means water operations, sewer operations, sanitation, and stormwater. Those funds all maintain a 30% fund balance minimum target. And as you can see from these projections, most of the funds show about a balance between revenue and expenditure expectations. The exception to that is stormwater. That fund has excess funds on hand, and to be able to complete phase 2 of Church Street, the fund would be spending down fund balance from where I think it is today at about $92,000 to closer to $70,000 on hand, which again is well in exceedance of 30% of annual revenues of about $45,000. Capital projects, to again highlight, I won't go through each of those, but it's a mix of street maintenance and general type projects such as the Church Street Bridge, with utility specific projects like an analysis of the water and sewer plant capacity and CIP needs, and rehab of the water park, which is again a general item, and then again the water tower construction that was agreed in the development agreement with Hills Pet Nutrition. This is just a quick overview of the 2-page CMIP document that's developed and updated and maintained each year, with projects broken out by category for the current year on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side looking ahead 5 years out into the future. The debt service budget, that's something we've covered previously, but again, looking ahead at next year, we've got about $1.35 million in budgeted obligations for general debt, for geo bond debt, and about $125,000 for lease purchase payments on City Hall, police station, and the fire pumper and street sweeper equipment. We've looked at this slide before, but I just wanted to highlight it again, that as we look forward into 2026, we see a sharp decrease in the funding obligations for utility debt. So that's when large capital projects such as the water line extension to BPU or construction of the utility plant updates rolls off the books, basically. And so that concludes my kind of overview of the proposed budget. I think, Mayor Pro Tem, it may be a good time to hold the budget public hearing, and then we can address the last part of the agenda, if that's all right.
Thank you, Dan. What I thought to do was go ahead and hold a public hearing, and then we would come back to the budget for council members' consideration and any changes they'd like to make before we vote on the budget. So at this time, I'd like to open up the public hearing for proposed 2022 budget as published. Is there anybody out now in the audience that'd like to make comment, pro or against? If not, the public hearing's closed. Also, at this time, I'd like to consider adoption of the 2022 budget, but started out with discussion on the budget itself before we vote.
Mayor Pro Tem, I might finish the last couple slides, if that's okay, in the
That would be
presentation.
fine. That'd be fine.
So the general fund mill levy in particular is an item that we've had questions and discussion about at recent work sessions. And I provided a quick detailed deep dive into that because there are still, as we mentioned earlier tonight, the opportunity to make other decisions for that fund in particular, the general fund. So this slide demonstrates, looking back at 2021, 2022, the proposed mill levy by fund. And so the first two shown in the table are the debt service fund, and you can see again the half mil shift from the general city fund to the debt service fund. That helps us with a little over $500,000 in revenue in 2022 meet all of our general obligation debt obligations. So that one is not the particular focus of this next couple of slides. The general city fund you can see shown as last year being 27.639 mils, and for this year to keep a flat mill levy overall for the city, leaving the library mill levies alone and leaving the debt service mill levy at $500,000 more than before. That mill levy at a flat level would be 27.139. That equates to a little less than 1.5 million in revenue across the whole tax base. The revenue it creates is one aspect I wanted to point out on this slide because that bleeds into the discussion on the next slide. Are there any questions about this breakout before we advance? Okay. So this slide illustrates, I think, what you could consider a scenario-based demonstration. And so you can see that the proposed budget, which includes all of the funding for all the initiatives that we just discussed on the prior set of slides, does require a mill levy of 26.754 mils. That's again less than the 27.139 mils that the flat mill levy. The difference in those two numbers is at almost 0.9 mils. It's 0.896 mils, which is the equivalent of about $48,000 and $48,163 on an annual basis. What I wanted to point out in more detail, which I apologize if the slide gets a little too in-depth, in terms of funding reserves, when we examine our general fund balance, we have to make sure we're maintaining 15% of operating reserves. Most years we try to end the year, of course, higher than that because that means we're better prepared for unexpected eventualities. When we look at next year's budget and when we project revenues versus expenditures for the base budget that we've talked about with the proposed enhancements included, we still have about $27,000 and a few $100 of excess funds and reserves on hand, and that reflects 0.511 mils. In addition to that, if we had again kept that mill levy flat, we still have about 0.385 of 2022 revenue from property tax that again is unallocated. So in a nutshell, what that boils down to is the city council still has a decision to make, or a potential decision to make, about doing one of three things. The first would be finding or planning to find additional services, programs, equipment, anything that could cost up to the total amount of $48,163, and make the decision now or sometime early next year on how to allocate those funds. The second option would be to reduce the general fund mill levy requirements by 0.385 mils, which is a little over $20,600, and still maintain about $27,000 in excess fund balance above that 15% target. The third option would be to reduce the general fund mill levy by almost 0.9 mils, which is about $48,000 impact to the general fund. Each of those options has its own set of merits and obviously outcomes. But again, when we're looking at an over $3 million budget, this last $48,000 is the discussion that still, I guess, needs finalized. We've had discussions in the past meetings about it, and we're happy to answer any questions you have about it. But the point of this presentation was to just illustrate some capacity that's still available to either find other things to fund, maintain excess reserves either in a larger amount or a smaller amount, or to choose to reduce the mill levy lower than what it was last year for the general fund. So I hope that's not confusing, and I apologize if I misspoke in any way, but happy to answer any questions the council might have.
Thank you for all the detail. We already voted on the motion to exceed the revenue neutral rate. So,
all of these scenarios don't impact that decision.
right, yeah, I know.
How would this play in the three scenarios that you mentioned? How does that play with Senate Bill 13?
So,
And so into the future.
certainly. So the impact of Senate Bill 13 next year and in all future years, unless it changes, are that the intent of adding an additional publication requirement for another public hearing, and next year including personal notices mailed to each taxpayer in the jurisdiction showing the highest possible mill levy that's being considered, is to generate transparency. That's the primary goal. But I think what many jurisdictions see and what people expect is, because these communities, all of them, cities, counties, school districts, library districts, they will all be publishing their maximum mill levy that they will contemplate. So they can always do what we're doing tonight and contemplate reducing it, but you have to publish and give these notices to taxpayers of the max. And so if everyone puts their maxes in and people get a tax quote, basically, that shows potentially a large increase or a largest possible increase for every jurisdiction, the idea is that there will be more difficulty in having support to either keep things flat or to ever increase it in the future. So that's probably the biggest anticipated impact that we could see. We'd still be allowed to raise it back, but there may be, impacts on the feedback everyone gets about that.
Council members, any more comments? Not, chair entertains a motion.
I guess, so that the three options there, I mean, we could just adopt the budget as presented, and that's gonna include what we have there. Then we would find another use for those excess funds as presented, right?
That's correct. Yeah, the published notice included the flat mill levy with last year, and so those 48,000 And $163 would be an item that the council could elect at any time to pick a specific project to authorize the expense.
Perfect. So I would make a motion to adopt the 2022 budget as presented.
Okay, we've got a motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
We have a second. Is there any more discussion?
If I could talk, I would.
Okay.
Well, I'm gonna try to get this out the best I can, but we set policy limits for what Dan said and to have reserves, and we don't follow our own policy limits. And Dan was very clear at why we did it and what it does and the benefit of it. And so if we're not gonna follow our policy limits when we bypass them, are we gonna follow them when we go below them? The long-term effect of continually spending all the money we get, it accumulates over time. This is $20,000 is a drop in a $3 million bucket. It's really nothing. It's really nothing, but that's not the point. The point is we set policy limit, and if we need to review the policy limits, then let's review the policy limits. They're there for a reason, and we just step past that reason. So that was my comment the last meeting, and the excess reserves we have, we're in great shape. The city is growing, it's continuing to grow. You can see it grow every day to day. Valuations continue to increase, and if we continue to spend every penny we get, that's a great thing, but someday we will pay for that. And so,
Chris, this is just, I don't disagree with anything you're saying, but this is just a very weird year, given what the state did. And also, we're still in the middle of a pandemic, and so we don't know if we might need that now or not. We just don't know. And so I'm glad that we budget conservatively. I'm glad that we have reserves, all of those things, but this is a very unique year. And because of that, I think passing this budget, because we can't see into the future, and we're passing this well in advance of when 2022 is going to start. So I think we just need to move forward with the budget as it is, knowing that there's going to be potholes in the winter and people are going to want to fill them.
I also certainly agree with your statements, Mr. Donnelly, and I think they're very important. I think they're very realistic. I think they're very well-reasoned. And me personally, I do have concerns about the future in Senate Bill 13, and I feel like this is almost I don't want to say a freebie year, but a year to figure that out, so to speak, and understand what the future will hold when we don't have the ability to do this as much. So that's my thoughts on it.
Any more comments? Okay, we have a motion on second on the floor. Dan, will you call the roll, please?
Ms. McCutcheon,
Yes.
Ms. Stevens.
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Hempel,
I'm going to vote no on this one.
Mr. Donnelly,
no.
Mr. Dale.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes 3-2.
Okay?
Good job, by the way, Dan. You did a very nice job.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you all for your work through the year. This is a huge part of our job as staff and the city council, and we really appreciate all your help.
It's very clear, and you do good work.
Okay, next item on the agenda is consider approval of the bid to complete directional boring surfaces as part of the 12-inch loop waterline project. George, would you like to start out with this, please?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Pro Tem. So certainly not as exciting as getting our budget approved for next year, but I would just echo the kudos to the council and Mr. Porter for taking such good ownership over the budget development. This particular item is related to our looped water line where we have to cross Kansas Avenue. The county engineer is mandating that we do directional boring as opposed to just creating an open trench and going through that gravel road. So to be in compliance with the county direction on that, we went out and obtained 3 bids. Staffs reviewed those. recommending to move forward with the low bid there of $48,279 for, as submitted by Westland Construction. And looking for your approval on that.
Okay. Council members, do you have any comments, questions? Staff? Okay, Chair entertains a motion.
I'll make a motion to authorize approval of the bid from Westland Construction for directional boring services for an amount not to exceed $48,279.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a second. Dan, why don't you call the roll on this one, please?
Ms. McCutcheon,
Yes.
Ms. Stevens,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Hempel,
Yes.
Mr. Donnelly, Mr. Dale.
Yes.
All ayes, thank you.
Next thing on the agenda is consider approval to purchase salt for snow and ice control. Dan, would you like to address this, please, for staff?
Certainly, thank you. This item is oddly enough always considered in September. It must be when the county does their bidding process that we rely upon. We're a small fish compared to the county in terms of how much salt we purchase for road safety in the winter, but this is a critical item, and we do budget over $10,000 to be able to afford to purchase roughly between 150 and 200 tons of this material for all of our winter snow and ice events. This year, we actually had a great and unexpected drop in the price. Last year, due to a lot of uncertainty at the time, the cost reached what I think has been a record high in George and I's tenure of $60.13 a ton. This year, it dropped back down lower than ever before, I think, to $54.26 a ton. That price is, again, bid out by the county, and we and other communities in the county piggyback off their bidding process to help us acquire the ability to purchase these items at a competitive bid. The low bidder, again, and for I think the third year in a row, is Independent Salt Company. And in discussions with Kent Heskett, our Public Works Director, again, we target between 150 and 200 tons. This year, if we order 200 tons, we can expect when they measure it out, they could be high or they could be low. And so to avoid any possible procurement approval problem, we'd ask that the council consider approval for up to 205 tons at that price, which would result in a cost of $11,123.30 as the highest possible cost. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
Council members have any questions?
Was there a shortage last year? I mean, we had difficulty gaining access to it last year, correct?
That was part of it. Between shortages and also that was at the midst of sort of the reopening from everything being shut down. A lot of communities made purchases earlier in the year that almost exhausted delivery availability. Also was a big thing as truckers and delivery became harder to get done.
Do you anticipate any of that this year at all?
Kent didn't indicate any concerns. He did want to get the order in promptly, but this would stock us for a good and a tough year. So I don't think he'd anticipate any problems if we can get it done.
How much did we use last year?
Pretty much everything we had. I mean, we had a little in reserve. So the other thing, there was a shift where we used to keep some amount of sand also available. We're moving away, as many communities are, from using sand to treat roads just because of the residuals that are left come spring. And so we're primarily focused on salt. We do use a couple of other additives based on temperature, especially if there's icing, that will add to it. So we have gradually increased our purchase, again, as part of that shift away from sand. It's kind of hard to predict. I mean, going into a storm event, maybe we won't have anything before year end, and so the limited supply we still have available might be good. And we could have 3 to 10 winter events before the end of the year. And so we're lucky that the county does offer this, and they have a better purchasing authority than we do, and then we get to benefit from that competitive pricing. But I suspect if Mr. Heskett thought we needed 200 tons, we'll probably be in line to use that.
Okay. Any more comments from council members? Okay, we already had a motion and second. All those in favor?
I don't believe we've had a motion on
Oh,
this
we did?
item yet.
Okay, chair entertains a motion. Sorry.
Oh, somebody else gonna get it.
I'll make a motion to authorize the purchase of salt supplies in 2021? I guess we're buying them this year, right? So in 2021 from Independent Salt Company for a total maximum cost of $11,123.30.
Okay. We have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Ayes got her, Dan.
Thank you.
Okay, next thing on the agenda, consider approval of the bid to complete geotechnical exploration associated with the 2022 elevated water storage tank improvement project. George, would you like to start out on that one, please?
Yep, thanks, Mayor Pro Tem. So this is an item that we've talked about a lot recently. As part of the initial design work that we've approved for BG Consulting to start on us for this project, it's their recommendation for a variety of reasons, including expediting the project as quickly as possible, that we do the soil exploration as part of our design work as opposed to designing a water tower and then sending it out for bid and having interested respondents come in and do the soil testing. It'll also aid us in ensuring that we have proper design of how that structure is going to be stabilized into the ground. And so BG on our behalf went out and secured 3 bids for this. And those are included in the memo, and a memo from BG as well as the bids themselves. They're recommending to move forward with Terracon, who is the low bid comparative with the items that were included as part of their submittal. So that's staff seeking approval to move forward with that expense.
Council members' instructions, comments, discussion. Chair entertains a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the proposal from Terracon for geotechnical exploration associated with the 2022 elevated water storage tank project for an amount not to exceed $4,500 and authorization to issue a notice to proceed to the company.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
Second.
We have a second. Any more discussion among council members? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. City manager's agenda.
Mayor Pro Tem, I don't have any additional items tonight.
That's good. City attorney.
I have no items.
Okay. Under Mayor Pro Tem, I have 3 things. George, could you give us an update on the water and sewer project out at the business park, please?
Sure. I'll start with the sewer line. We're about 85% complete on that project. We're kind of down into the lower number of days left, both on the working days assigned to the project as well as substantial completion. We're probably going to be right up against that deadline. I wouldn't be surprised if we might need to look for an additional few days at the end, but significant progress has been made on that. On the looped water line, I'd say we're about 65 to 70% complete. If we're looking at breaking it out into segments, the largest run on a property, we are about 95% complete there, but we've been kind of phasing it in with clearing as well as placement of the line as we go. So we've made really significant and fairly quick progress on that. And again, I would have to give kudos to our Public Works team since we're self-performing that. We did rent some heavy equipment to help, but they're doing a good job of moving as quickly as they can. So
Okay,
good
thank
shape
you.
on both of those.
Can you give us an update on Yoki, the one on the corner this time, as far as demolition, please?
I believe that, well, we went through the process, we awarded the contract, we've received the bond from the company that's doing the work, and we expect them to actually mobilize this week to get started on the demolition of the 6th and Yoki property.
Okay. And that's all I have. City council agenda. City council members have any comments? Okay. Skip the mayor agenda. I believe we need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We got a motion, we got a second.
Second.
Got a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye.